Weidner here, Reality Check. Thanks for watching. Hit subscribe, like, and all that jazz, and help me grow the channel. I am over 20,000 subscribers. It took a long time to get here, and we're in a good place. A lot of you are probably wondering what we're doing, talking about Cherokee Little People at the beginning of World War III, and I totally understand your concerns. And yesterday I was at Costco in Colorado Springs, and the line at each cash register went almost to the back of the store. I gave up counting at 30 customers behind just me. And everybody was filled to the top. So it was clear that everyone, was in a panic state. And, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope we don't go to war. I don't, I'm pretty much anti-war. I believe in defending yourself, but I don't think we have anything to defend here. And we've been involved in a lot of wars ourselves. And we, stand on our high horse like we're some moral authority, when actually we don't have that much moral authority either. So that's all I'm going to say about that. I stay out of politics. So today we're going to talk about something that's interested me for a long time. And that is that all over the world, whether Latin America, which I've been to extensively, or Europe, which I've been to extensively, or Canada, even in Indonesia, are legends. And these legends are of little people that live in the woods. And they're 2.5 feet tall, generally around there, maybe 3 feet. And they're really they live underground, and they're really into mining and all the things of the lore, the leprechaun lore, all the lore from Europe. And as you know from my YouTube channel, I went to these little stone huts that are about 1.5 miles away from my house here in South Central Colorado. And let's play that video, Mac. These are the mysterious stone huts of the San Luis Valley. They've been here since the first miners came in the 1870s. That door is about 2 feet at the most high. No one knows what they're for or who built them. There's another one. Again, the door is about the same height. No one knows who built them. The miners didn't build them. Some people say that they were built by the miners to store their food in from bears, but what you really do to save your food from getting eaten by bears is you hang them high up in the tree. The bear can't get to it. And one over here now. Again, the door opening is about 2 feet. No one knows who built these. The Ute Indians say that it was the little people, that there's a tribe of small people that live in these mountains, and these were their homes. And that they scattered when the white miners came in 1870, 150 years ago. And they've been sitting here ever since. To me, that's the best explanation for these guys. They're clearly built, intentionally built for a creature that's about 2 feet high. It doesn't rain that much here, so it would protect you for the most part. That's the inside. Very odd. Very odd and very strange. A lot of work went into building these. Very mysterious, and no one can explain them. Just one of the few and many oddities that are around this area. One of the oddest areas in the world, really. Well, like I said in the video, the Ute Indians reported that those were the huts of little people, and that when the European miners arrived here in the area in 1880 with their explosions and all the things that Western miners use, they drove the little people up into the mountains further away from us. And they're still reported. I have friends who've seen, occasionally will see one out in the woods, and they have clothes and everything, and they just live up there. And you know, we don't know much about them. And that brings me to our guest today. My guest today is Mary Joyce, and she's written this incredibly great book called Cherokee Little People Were Real. And what she did is something that I think should be done more often. What Mary did was she got people who were advanced age to tell her about some things that happened in the past. And we learned a lot from this. I think more people should maybe interview elders before they pass on and try to get their stories, because it's really almost a different world. And so, hey, Mary, how you doing?
I'm doing real well. I honestly did not know that you had little people close, or little remnants of little people where you live. That's a story I probably should follow up on.
Yeah, you should. It's incredible. And I've actually seen bare footprints in the mud at about 11,000 feet, little tiny, this big, little tiny footprint, no shoes on. And you know, I was like, who's got their little kid running around up in the mountains, you know, with their no shoes on? It just didn't make any sense, especially this was like late fall. But that's all I've seen. I have a friend who saw one while hiking, saw it run off into the bush. And then I know another guy who actually had an encounter with one that did not go well. The little guy was throwing rocks and sticks and did not want this guy in the area. It was clear. So they're a little bit, they can be a little bit malevolent is what I hear. And I don't think they like us, and probably for good reason.
They also will throw pebbles when they want to get food from people. And some of the people who live on the reservation, some of the old ones will put food out for the little people. And if they miss a day, they will hear pebbles on the roof, like a reminder, hey, don't forget us. So that's one way of communicating that isn't negative. It's just, hey, we like the food.
A good idea, actually. They seem to like areas where the Native Americans live. This is an area where they lived, and I know that the Navajo reservation has little people, because I've talked to some of the Native Americans there, and they tell me about it, among other things. We also have Sasquatch here, quite prevalent. A rather large tribe, I would say, lives here. So this is one of those
we have that in common too. We have Bigfoot here.
Yeah, I know you do.
After the show is over, you can email your address to me. I'll send you my Bigfoot book.
Oh, I'd love to read it. Sounds great. So let's talk about the events that you unfold that happened in the 1930s, right?
The old timers that I spoke with were all born in the early part of the 20th century. And the earliest one was seen him, I think he was born in 1915. And the first ones he saw he was about 6 or 7 years old. So that puts you around 1920, 21. But on the university, which is near here, that's Western Carolina University, there apparently was a whole city of little people. And that was the basis of why I wrote the book, Cherokee Little People Were Real.
Oh no, that's why I love the book, because it's tangible evidence for their existence. And of course, before we get into the excavation of the university, which is a fascinating story, by the way, we should iterate and reiterate that the Cherokee Indians that lived in North Carolina have had the Little People legends since Europeans arrived. They've told the Europeans from the beginning that the woods had little people in them. They live underground, and right?
That's correct. And for the even when I first moved here, which was in 1998, the Cherokee were very, very cautious about talking about it because the white people had always made fun of their stories about the little people. That was the major reason they clammed up. Once I did the book, once they found out I was open to this, I began to get all sorts of stories.
Oh, I hope you do another book with those stories. That'd be great. Yeah, so so most of the Native Americans in North America have little people legends. It's a well-known thing, and it tells me that they must have been a lot more pervasive than they are now. Although I know that Sasquatch is real because two of my best friends saw him with a group of people just recently, and they would have no reason to lie to me. So I'm saying to myself, if a 9.5 foot, 800 pound animal, human, whatever it is, can elusively stay away from the human race and not be found by science, then it would be even easier for little people to be elusive and hide in the woods, and right?
Absolutely. And I also find that it's very interesting that we have so many Bigfoot sightings and the little people stories in the same area.
Yeah, and that brings up another thing. We associate the little people with in the lore, especially in Europe, with mining and liking shiny objects, you might say, and the little people then those huts. That's right by where the miners who first arrived here from Europe in 1880 in this area, they're the first white people to see those huts, and they were vacated by that point. But what I'm saying is right next to where those huts was the biggest gold mine in southern Colorado. For 40 years, they pulled out tons and tons of gold out of this mine, which begs the idea, do the miners know something that we don't? In other words, are they looking for evidence of little people? So that tells them that there must be gold nearby, because in your story, there's also evidence that they were tunneling and looking for gold and other objects and minerals. But let's get back to your story because it's so interesting. So they began excavating the Western Carolina University, right? Is that what happened?
Yes, and it's had different names, but we'll just stick with Western Carolina University. It's in Cullowhee, North Carolina. It's in the mountains of Western North Carolina. And in the stories that I began to collect were from the 1930s. And there's an old building there. It's called the McKee Building. It's been a grade school and a high school, and it's still on campus. It's part of the university now. And the first witnesses to evidence were building this McKee Building. And when they were cutting into this virgin soil, they found these little tunnels. All the tunnels are cut out of red clay, real dense red clay. They're typically like 2.5 feet wide, about 3.5, no more than 4 feet tall. They're square cut except for the top, and the top is arched. And if you know anything about engineering, that makes it stronger. Right. So they found 3 of those tunnels early on. And then as the campus began to expand, every time they were doing a construction project, whether it was a sewer or sewer lines or the stadium, whatever it was, they were finding these little tunnels. But they found more than that. They found more than that. Some of the men operated bulldozers and they were moving land around, and they brought up old skeletons. And the most famous one was a child-sized skull that sat on the desk of one of the science professors at the university. And he just said it was a child's skull from an Indian mound. A high school English teacher came by and looked at it, picked it up, looked at it carefully, and it had its wisdom teeth. And she said, this is not a child, it has its wisdom teeth. And so that sat on that professor's desk. And then one of the witnesses was a painter, as in painting walls. And he was doing an estimate for this science professor's house. And the rest of that little skeleton was in his house. So he saw both ends of this little skeleton.
Wow. I wonder if he had some kind of interest that he wasn't letting on people, you know what I mean? And so, I mean, you would be able to tell from the skeleton that it wasn't a child, is what I'm saying. There'd be arthritic conditions in the back and, you know, be crushed a little bit from the weight of years and all of that. So it would be pretty obvious that you weren't dealing with a child.
Correct. But the most obvious thing to the ordinary person would be the fact that it had wisdom teeth. And you have to be 18, 19, 20 to start hatching those.
Yep, exactly. So do you think the little people are still around in your area?
When I did the book, I was interviewing all these old timers because I wanted to get their information before they all passed away. And I simply wanted to preserve the information. And the first thing I did was an academic thing that I gave to museums. And as I began to explore this topic more, I began to find other information, and I got lots of photos and location maps, and I turned it into what I call a real book. And again, that's called Cherokee Little People Were Real. And there's lots of unusual, that's it. And there's lots of unusual evidence that supports it. For example, back in 1940, there was a humongous flood here of the Tuckasegee River. And there was a little boy, he was 5 years old, and he found what he called a lead head. It was an oval shaped a profile of a face. It had a face on each side. And he called it a lead head because it weighed so much. But the face looks like a leprechaun on both sides. And it was molded. There was a seam that went around the edge of it. And you're finding the picture of it. That's it. And I put a leprechaun next to it, and you can see how similar the ears and the nose are. And
the picture that I have of the little person that J.C. Johnson shot, which I should have brought to the show, has those ears too, by the way. Those kind of Dr. Spock or Mr. Spock ears, you know?
Well, what's interesting is the little people don't all look alike. The ones at the university. No. Is that my background noise? Am I causing that? Let me turn down my volume.
I don't hear anything.
Okay, as long as you don't hear it. Anyhow, lost my thought worrying about your audio.
Yeah, well, we were talking about the medallion that the kid found under a tree or something.
And the way they all look different. So that one, there's one that's described as having red whiskers and would have squinty eyes like the sun bothered them. So that was one type. And the Cherokee did not like those kinds of little people. They would try to kill them. Yeah. There was another kind that looked to this day like the Cherokee look today. So there's a great similarity. Then when I was up in Tennessee, there's a whole different breed of them there in the mountains. And those little people look European, and they dressed more like Europeans than lederhosen. And so just from my experience, I've seen and learned about 3 different kinds. And I also found out about the little people out in South Dakota.
Oh yeah, right. In Wyoming, the miners that found the little mummy in cave. It was like 2.5 feet tall. It was definitely an adult, and that's now missing. But they did manage to get a photograph of it. I like how a lot of this stuff goes missing, by the way.
Let me tell you this, because the Smithsonian is not my favorite institution. They have taken stuff and you never see it again. And I was at my other office, which is Dunkin' Donuts, and I overheard a conversation with a woman who proved to be a grad student in the anthropology department. And she told me that, and this was a couple of years ago, that they had giant skeletons with 6 toes. They had 2 of those skeletons. They had the little people skeleton, and probably other things that were at this university, Western Carolina University, and those had just been sent up to the Smithsonian. I thought, oh, we're never going to see these again. So that was a big disappointment to learn that. Made my coffee kind of taste bad.
One other thing that you pointed out in your book that I found fascinating was that the mounds that were in the area were said by the Cherokee to have been made by the Little People, and they were like the tailings of these tunnels. And they would
All right, that was the
mounds.
old timers. That was from a couple of the old timers who did construction at the university, and some of them had grown up there as children, so they could remember when that was a field where there was a farm, and there was this mound, and in the middle of it was a tubular hole that went straight down into the mound. And the farmer would put big logs down in there to keep the cattle from falling in and breaking their legs. The old timers said that these tunnels that they discovered, many of them connected to this mound. They said it was nothing but a pile of dirt from creating these tunnels, which makes a lot of sense, really.
It really does, and makes you wonder about the mounds like in the Ohio Valley that the Native Americans supposedly built. Are they tailings also of tunnels that are nearby?
Makes you wonder.
Really does. And near Olympia, Washington, there's a famous park, Mounds National Park, and it's probably 2,000 or 3,000 mounds. They're all in a row, perfectly straight line. Some farmers have cut fields into them. There's a highways that go through them. I've been there and I've flown drones over it, and it's right next to Mountaineer. And I'm like, first thing I'm thinking is somebody, because these are very ancient mounds. And my first thing is this tailings from some kind of tunnel system that's in Mount Rainier? And you don't know what to do with it, so they just piled it here. And also there's been speculation that near me, the Great Sand Dunes, Great Sand Dunes National Park, well, it has it's right up next to a mountain called Mount Blanca, and Mount Blanca is where the Hopi Indians say they escaped the last catastrophe by going inside Mount Blanca, where they were helped by what they call the ant people. We're unclear the ant people were, but when they did, Chris O'Brien did great work on this. When they did, they sampled the sand at the Great Sand Dunes. They said that this comes from inside a mountain. This is not blown dirt. This is from inside a mountain. This is a very, very special kind of silicate that had to come from a mountain. And then years of, they went inside Mount Blanca, and you have to wonder about that also. And it just, when I found out that, when you said that, it changed my view of what all these mounds may be. And again, the Ohio Valley is well known for having giant cave systems, and same here, we're known for having giant cave systems in our mountains. So I just wonder, if all those mounds are not connected by this same kind of idea. And, and there's reasons to go underground too, by the way. It's safer in a lot of ways. Yeah. And so tell me, go ahead.
The Cherokee weren't originally from this area. They came from the Great Lakes a long time ago. And when they got here, they found these little gardens that were well tended, but they didn't see any people around. And finally, they saw these little people come out from underneath the ground, take the produce from their garden and take it back underground. And they originally called them the Moon People because they would come out at night. So that's one of the early names of the Cherokee Little People.
Right. Very interesting. Yeah, I've often thought that if I took my night vision goggles into the woods here at night, I'd probably see some unexpected things. But yeah, it's just fascinating. And so when one of the tunnels that where these guys were excavating. Somebody went in and they found the thing that you're looking for gold mining, right? You're looking for this like
Right.
purple.
They found veins of gold. There was two mining operations that that witnesses told me about. That was one. And the other one was that first man I mentioned, Johnny Clayton. He's the oldest witness that I talked to, or second oldest. And as a boy, his father operated a mica mine. And when he was like 6 or 7, the miners came back to his dad's house or to their house all excited because when they were digging their own tunnel, they came across another older tunnel perpendicular to where they were digging. And it was a little old mining tunnel that would match these little people. So that was the first time that he really saw those. And he said that the miners were all excited about it, and there was lots of talk about little people. And at that time, that generation interacted with the Cherokee, and they were familiar with the stories, and you know, many of them believed it.
Well, I remember that they were trying to build a road in, I think, Iceland about 10 years ago, and they had to actually consult somebody about whether this hill that they were going to remove would violate the pact that they had between them and the little people. And they said, yes, it would. And so they actually had to build the highway around this mound to protect it. And that's a true story, by the way. Somebody from Iceland told me this story. And this is recent. So this is not a long time ago. This is recent. This is within the last 10 years. So there's still kinds that, you know, entertain all this and think it's real. And personally, I hope we don't mess with the little people. I know that the red-headed ones are the ones that I've heard are the malevolent ones. They're the ones that like to throw rocks at you and scare you, and they don't want you around, and they don't like humans. I've never seen the Native American ones, but I know that they're out there because I've heard reports of them, and they have black hair and dark eyes and kind of a tan skin, and they're very elusive, and they wear plants and stuff in their hair, and they can stand really still, so you don't even know you're looking at them. And they have odd qualities. Their hair has an odd quality. Their hair has this kind of quality of taking on the color of whatever they're around. So it's not totally, but just a little bit, just enough to make them not be able to be seen, you know. And I know this guy, he was hunting, he was up in his stand, and he was waiting for the deer, and he looked down, and he thought it was a little girl, and ran by him, and he thought, what's a little girl doing out here? You know, it's like 4 a.m, right? He started getting worried, and he started following her tracks. He got down off the stand and started, because he thought it was a little girl, worried, and he ran into a whole nest of these guys. And they started throwing stuff at him. And he described exactly what you said. They had red hair and beards and looked like little Europeans. And he ran. He got really scared and ran. He had a gun and everything. He still got scared. They were like ganging up on him, he said. So I don't know. You ever heard any stories like that?
When you're a little person, what can you do? For example, when I was out in South Dakota, I got to meet the daughter of somebody who had been a shaman for the tribe, and she seemed to have some special abilities too. But she was telling me about the time that she and her cousins went fishing with their grandmother along a creek. Now that's flat land out there in that particular part of South Dakota. And let's see if I can keep this short. Anyhow, they eventually found this little cave off the side of this creek. And the boys went in there and they took a number of things, including an old-fashioned quiver and arrows and a little bow and arrow. And they brought them back, and the grandfather said, you take those back, don't mess with their stuff. And for a while thereafter, Their chickens were being killed and different things were happening. And I kind of sympathize with the little people because they're little. What are they going to do to keep people from messing with them? And so putting a little bit of fear into the big white people or the big Indian people is one way to do it.
Yeah, it is, and it's like they know how to be creepy at the right moment. And I mean, I've talked to like that this hunter. He's 6'3", not afraid of anything, and he's actually afraid to go out in the woods now because of that incident. And
I want to tell you a non-creepy story. There's a young Cherokee woman who never would have talked to me except we had a mutual friend, and because of that, she was willing to share her stories. And when she was a child, and I think to this day, her family has a little trailer up in a remote part of the reservation. And that's where they go for their celebrations and parties and picnics. And they use the trailer for the restroom and for cooking. And so the kids, and she was one of them, were playing hide and seek. And she went to hide inside the shower of this trailer. And when she pulled back the curtain, there was this little man with a big grin on his face. She described him as looking like Mowgli from the Jungle Book, and said it scared her to death. She went running to her daddy immediately. But he wasn't trying to be bad. He had a big playful smile on his face when she opened the curtain.
probably looking for food.
Or just having fun. I think they saw all the kids were playing.
Oh, that's true. They like that. They like to watch.
Yeah, I tend to lean that direction because of the smile.
Yeah, no, they do like little kids playing. I know someone who has a recording of little kids playing, and he'll go out in the woods and play it. And he does it to attract Sasquatch. So Sasquatch is attracted to little kids playing, but he also reported little people coming up and trying to figure out what was going on. I quickly told him not to go do that anymore, because if find out you're fooling them, they're not going to be too happy with you. You know, I wouldn't want a Bigfoot coming at me angry because I fooled it. Yeah, so so since you've written the book, you've heard a lot of stories. What were some of the interesting stories that you've heard?
Well, first of all, there's a lot more in the book than what you and I are touching on.
Oh, much more.
So I don't want people to think that's all there is. But because of the book, I've learned a lot since then. And I did the original research before I wrote the book. The original research with the old timers was done in 2000. It's a long time ago now. And all of those men are dead now. So I'm so glad I did it.
Really good job. Thank you.
I just felt like I had to do that. If nothing else, I had to preserve it. So anyhow, since then, I've learned a lot. And 17 years after those initial interviews, I was contacted by friends of mine that live on another ridge not too far from where I live. And they had debated whether they were going to show me what they had caught on their game camp, which is outside of their home, which is up on a ridge at the end of a gravel road. So it's really remote. And they finally decided they would show it to me. One of them thought it was a spirit they had seen, and the other one thought it might be a little person. So when I looked at it, it was not real clear, but it looked like a mostly nude little person with the dark straight hair from the back. And what I did was I took their photos and I increased the density on it. Anything that is alive will go into a magenta color. Anything that is spirit will not. And so for one of the postings I did on the website that I do, I showed these ghost pictures and compared them to these little people or little person picture. And the ghost never turned magenta. So what they caught in the woods was looked like a little person. And the man went out and he went to where the little person had been by a tree. And he kept squatting down until his wife could determine what the height was for the little person. And they figured it was about 3.5 feet tall, which is the most consistent report that I hear from people who've encountered or seen little people.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Any other interesting stories?
You mean
before we
the
go on
one
with your-
since the book? Another one, there was a woman, Cherokee, and we had been friends for some time, and she came into where I was working one day, and she brought her grandchild with her, who had the body of a mature Cherokee woman, but her eyes just barely came over the counter of where we were. And she's never allowed me to write about it, and I can't get too specific about it, but the little girl had both Hawaiian and Cherokee background. Both cultures have the little people, and it looks like maybe she was the result of this breeding of the two races. And she also was very sensitive to light, always wore sunglasses. Many times it would be like pink colored sunglasses or something, but the light bothered her eyes. She died as she wasn't out of her teens when she died. The pediatrician, the doctor, could never figure out what was wrong with her. She was totally different than anybody else. And the child's mother was too proud to explain what she thought the background was for her daughter. And it was the grandmother that told me about it. So it's too bad. If the doctor had been let in on it, he might have discovered some very interesting things.
Yeah, it is too bad. Yeah, in your book, you have, some of the old timers talking about a family, I forget their name now, who were all really,
Hoopers?
really short. Yeah.
Right.
And the guy had
Yeah.
to stand while he was driving his
He could
truck.
drive a truck. He would stand and he would look, here's the arch of the steering wheel. He would look through that to drive it. And all the people knew him and his family, and they had miniature furniture in their house. But that's very unusual. I mean, that is the only case I know of where they actually were living like the regular white people.
Yeah, so you have to wonder what happened there. Were they interbreeding, or did a group of little people just decide to go
I never
go
found
white
the
on
answer
them?
to that one. Never found the answer, and the old timers didn't know either. So
And then, of course, that family seems like they've died out since there's not 3.5 foot people around anymore. So, and we're not talking about dwarves or anything like that,
no,
or
no, they're
midget.
perfectly proportioned, and
Yeah.
they're not midgets either, because midgets have a certain quality in their voice and things. They are just like miniature people, which midgets are
Yeah.
too, but there's still some difference there.
Yeah, these are completely proportioned like we are, though, with
Correct.
the waist coming up at what are 3/5 of the way up, and the shoulders and the head proportions, and that's what the reports I've heard. They look just like little tiny, little short humans, and
Correct. If you want, let's focus on cute stories, since you apparently only heard about them causing mischief or bad mischief. When I went to the place in Tennessee where they have the little people that look more European, the man who invited me on his property to see their entrance and where they live, said the young ones, the teenagers, are the ones that you're most likely to see. They're the ones that are just like teenagers. What can I say? He said sometimes he'd be out in the woods walking, and one of them would be up in a tree and would come down like this in his face, just to tease, just to create some interesting phenomena or results.
At the Archuleta Mesa in New Mexico, which is the Apache Indian reservation, they had a casino there. And one night, the guard was looking up at the cameras that were looking out of the parking lot, and he said that, and this apparently is on videotape somewhere, but we're trying to find it. He said he looked up, and about 15 small humans jumped up on the cars, and were all jumping on the hoods and this went on for like 10 minutes. And he said, finally, we went out there because it's starting to cause damage, right, to the cars, and all the horns were going off and everything, you hear it. And so he had to go out there. And when he went out there, you just saw them all run away. And that was all the evidence that they had, was this videotape, which if anybody knows where that video is, we would love to see it, right?
Absolutely. So anyhow, this proves that teenagers are the same no matter what species. And it's also true, you're more likely to see a teenage Bigfoot too, because they're a little bit more careless. and get caught by cameras more easily than the adults.
In fact, the recent sighting by my friends up in the mountains, from their description, it was a male, young male. And I think he was actually interested in my friend's wife, who's very beautiful. I really do. I think he was interested that he made his showing to show her how big and tough he was. And because the experts tell me that they won't show themselves unless they want you to see them. And I think the little people are the same way. If they want you to see them, they'll show themselves to you. But for the most part, they don't want anything to do with us. And I totally understand.
You may know this. You're implying that he was sexually interested in the man's wife. Dr. Ketchum has done the initial research on the DNA and has found that the Bigfoot are half human and half some unknown species. So they're kind of like distant cousins. And obviously somewhere along the line, the two species interacted. And originally she was really maligned by the scientific community, but since then a number of scientists have confirmed her research.
Oh no, it's super frustrating because I mean I admire him a lot. I know some researchers. One, I think he hit a Bigfoot accidentally, and they got the hair samples. He didn't hurt it, but he hit it in his car. He got hair samples on his bumper, and he took it in. And they said, "Oh, this is contaminated. It's human." It's like, yes, it is human.
Well, the problem is, if you get real technical, you have to have the nuclear DNA in order to find the paternal side of the Bigfoot or anything, I guess. And usually hair samples don't have the root. If you have the root, the nuclear DNA is there, and that's where the difference is. And that's why so many samples are just dismissed as, oh, that's just human. Well, that's only part of the story.
Yeah, I know you're right, because I was one of the people that found I didn't find it. I was one of the first white people to see the mummy that was in Peru, I think 4 or 5 years ago. Remember the mummy they found? I was the person that was on the expedition to find that mummy.
Which mummy? Because there's been a number of in South America.
It's a mummy with 3 fingers, and 3 toes, and it has like sort of bird-like features on its face, but it's a humanoid. But we did DNA testing on that sucker, and we spent some money on it and did a deep dive DNA. And DNA is much harder to decipher than people think. We were at that for years before we even realized that almost anything about it. So you send in your DNA to these companies to tell you what your background is. No, I'm sorry. No, it's much more difficult than that. It would cost you $100,000 to do a recombinant DNA examination to find out what your heritage is, and only rich people can do that. So I poo-poo all that DNA stuff after having gone through what I just. So yeah, we if you got the DNA and you had the money of a little person, it would just end up being a human. There wouldn't be any point in it. It would just be a little human. And I don't think there's probably another species involved with the little people. I just think that they're short people who don't want anything to do with us. That's it.
I don't know. I don't know of anybody who's done DNA research on them. I just don't. And maybe there is, but I don't know about it. Be an interesting way to go.
Yeah,
It might be unique at some level.
Maybe. Going back to Sasquatch, when there's only one primate on Earth whose females have protruding breasts, and that's humans. And we know from the Patty film that Sasquatch has protruding breasts. Again, telling us they're very close to human beings. Not saying they're human, just to human beings. And I can't tell you the number of stories that I've heard from women who have had experiences with Sasquatch that seemed of a somewhat sexual nature. There was no sex going on, but it seemed as if he was very attracted to these women. And these
Right.
women were all very beautiful, by the way. One was
Right.
60 years old when she told me her story. I said, when did this happen? She said, oh, 45 years ago. I said, can I see a picture of you? And I went, whoa, no wonder Bigfoot was attracted to you. So yeah, I don't think the little people are attracted to us that way at all. I think they just really don't want anything to do with us.
That seems to be the case.
Well,
But
Mary,
anyhow, yes, I'm sorry.
no, I really love your book. I hope people buy it. You're probably the
Okay.
go-to person now on the subject, aren't you?
I would never put myself in that category, but I think the book is worth reading, and there's lots of photos. It's not, and I write real concisely, so it's not a tedious thing to read. Sometimes
fun.
scholars get deep into their wordage, and you just get weary of it. So anybody could read this.
Yeah. And because you wrote it, you're now kind of little people, and people probably will start contacting you even after this interview. Maybe you'll get more stories. That would be really cool. And do another book. That would be really cool. Because I think this is a subject.
Let me bend over and get one more thing.
Yeah. I think this is a subject that really needs more examination. I really do. We have it in our history and our lore. Go ahead.
Since you flash one book, here's the other one. Can you see this one? This is about the Bigfoot.
Yeah, I definitely want to read that.
And like I said, you send me your address, I'll send it to you.
Okay.
And what is different about that book is it does not focus on the creepy, scary part of Bigfoot. I have gotten so many reports from firsthand experiencers who've had good experiences with Bigfoot. And Bigfoot have family. They're very human in so many ways. And I've chosen to focus on those rather than, we have plenty of books about them being monsters and scary. Well, that isn't all there is to them.
Yeah, I was talking to this guy here in Colorado in the San Juan Mountains, and it was an August day, about 3 years ago, and he decided that he was going to hike up to the top of one of our more famous mountains there. He left at like 1 in the afternoon. It was a 4-hour round trip hike to the top, and he just had t-shirt, shorts, and shoes, and some water. And they're going up the mountain, and as is wont in Colorado, late afternoon, suddenly the clouds started rolling in, and suddenly it started raining, and then the rain turned to ice. Then the ice, this happens last year, folks. It's like in 2 minutes, it goes from sunny to snowing. And that's what happened. He was caught in a snowstorm, and he couldn't see the trail anymore. He couldn't see his footprints, and he started getting lost. And then he started getting really cold. And then he started getting really tired, which is the first sign of hypothermia. And he said to himself, oh, I'm just going to sit down on this rock and rest and see if I can figure things out. And he sat down on this rock and he fell asleep, which is what happens. And he said when he woke up, he was over the shoulder of something, looking down at its ass. And this creature was on 2 feet, tearing through the woods at like 40 miles an hour with this guy who's a big guy on his shoulder, right? And this guy thought, I'm going to die. We're going to run into a tree. We're going to run into a rock. We're going to go off a cliff. Nothing can run through the forest this fast. It's impossible. All I know, he wasn't making any noise either. And he thought for sure he was going to die. Didn't know what was going on. His head kept bouncing against the thing's back as he was running through the woods. Then all of a sudden, he got slammed down to the ground. All he saw were 2 hairy off into the woods. He was all disoriented and dazed, and he looked around, and he was right next to his car.
Wow, good story.
Yep. So he saved him.
Yeah. In my book, I have a similar story. It goes back to the Civil War.
Yeah. In fact, I heard some of those the other day. Helping guys who were wounded and stuff. Right. Really kind of amazing. Really, it is amazing.
Gave them herbs and stuff to heal them, and all sorts of things. It's quite amazing. So
it is. Well, Mary, I'd like to have you back, talk about this some more, because it's just one of those subjects that nobody talks about. Everybody talks about Sasquatch, but nobody talks about the little people. And they have just as high a place in Native American lore as Sasquatch. Every tribe has their little people story and their Sasquatch story. And so I'm just trying to bring some light to that. And I want to thank you for writing the book.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation. You have a lot of creative projects going, and I wish you well with all of them.
Thank you so much. Hey, everybody, I'm Jay Weidner. You've been watching Reality Check, talking about the little people, the Native Americans, Sasquatch, and trying to get our minds off of World War III impending. We hope not. So everybody, we pray that we do not have a war. We hope there's no war. We want to go back to our lives. We don't like what's going on, but we're not in control of what's happening. So anyway, thanks for watching, everybody.